There is a fertilizer that delivers 10 times more nitrogen than manure. It costs nothing. It requires no factory. It needs no shipping container crossing oceans from distant mines. This fertilizer exists in unlimited quantities and regenerates itself automatically without any human intervention. World War I soldiers discovered it by accident. In the trenches of France and Belgium, surrounded by death and destruction, men noticed something strange. The patches of ground where they buried kitchen scraps and human waste grew vegetation with shocking intensity. Weeds exploded from the soil. Grass grew thicker than anywhere else on the battlefield. The soldiers were not scientists. They were farmers, laborers, and factory workers drafted into a war they did not choose. But they recognized what healthy soil looked like. They understood that something in those burial trenches was creating fertility that normal ground could not match. When the war ended, surviving soldiers carried this knowledge home. They dug trenches in their gardens. They buried organic waste directly in the soil. They watched their vegetables grow larger, healthier, and more abundant than anything chemical fertilizers could produce. The method spread through farming communities across Europe and America. Agricultural journals published instructions. Extension agents recommended the technique. For 2 decades, trench composting was standard practice for serious gardeners. Then the fertilizer industry discovered something alarming. A method that cost nothing was replacing products that cost money. A technique requiring no purchase was eliminating customers. A simple trench in the ground was threatening profits measured in billions. The industry responded as industries always respond. They promoted chemical alternatives as modern and scientific. They dismissed traditional methods as primitive and outdated. They funded research that ignored trench composting entirely while celebrating synthetic nitrogen. Within a generation, the method that World War I soldiers had proven with their own hands disappeared from agricultural education. This is the story of trench composting, the fertilizer that grows itself, and the industry that buried it deeper than any soldier ever buried kitchen scraps. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Let's begin. The science explains why trench composting outperforms every alternative. Understanding this requires examining what happens during decomposition at the molecular level. When organic matter breaks down, bacteria consume carbon compounds and release nitrogen as a byproduct. This nitrogen takes multiple chemical forms, some stable and some volatile. When organic matter decomposes on the surface, nitrogen escapes into the atmosphere as ammonia gas. You can smell it in poorly managed compost piles. That distinctive sharp odor is not just unpleasant, it represents fertilizer floating away, lost forever to the plants that need it. Each molecule of ammonia that reaches your nose is a molecule that will never reach a root. Surface composting loses 30 to 50% of available nitrogen to atmospheric release. Research conducted at Cornell University documented that open compost piles in warm weather can lose even higher percentages. The hotter the pile, the faster nitrogen volume. The very heat that accelerates decomposition also accelerates nutrient loss. Traditional manure applications suffer the same fate. Spread manure on top of soil, and half its nitrogen value evaporates before roots can absorb it. The fertilizer you paid for, transported, and spread disappears into thin air. Trench composting eliminates this loss entirely. Organic matter buried beneath 6 to 8 inches of soil cannot release gases into the atmosphere. The soil acts as a seal, trapping nitrogen compounds until plant roots extract them. Zero loss, complete efficiency. But the advantages extend beyond nitrogen retention. Buried organic matter attracts earthworms from surrounding soil. These worms consume the decomposing material and excrete castings with 5 times more nitrogen, 7 times more phosphorus, and 11 times more potassium than the surrounding earth. The worms do not just process the buried waste, they concentrate nutrients. As worms move through the soil, they create channels that improve drainage and aeration. They carry beneficial bacteria on their bodies, inoculating dead subsoil with living biology. A single trench becomes a superhighway of biological activity, extending far beyond its original boundaries. Dr. Clive Edwards at Ohio State University spent decades researching earthworm biology. His work documented that vermicompost, the material produced by earthworm digestion, contains plant growth hormones that synthetic fertilizers cannot replicate. These hormones stimulate root development, disease resistance, and fruit production in ways that pure nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium cannot achieve. The trench creates a biological engine that runs itself. No turning required like surface compost, no monitoring of carbon to nitrogen ratios, no waiting months for material to finish processing. The soil ecosystem handles everything automatically, while you grow vegetables in the beds above. The historical record confirms what science explains. During World War I, food shortages threatened civilian populations across Europe. The scale of the crisis is difficult to comprehend from modern comfort. German submarine warfare disrupted shipping lanes that had supplied food for generations. Agricultural workers were conscripted into military service, leaving fields untended. Traditional farming systems collapsed under the pressure of total war. Civilians faced rationing that reduced caloric intake below healthy minimums. Children grew up malnourished. The elderly died from complications of hunger that official records attributed to other causes. Governments encouraged home food production with desperate urgency. In Britain, the campaign was called Dig for Victory, though that specific phrase became more famous in World War II. The principles emerged from World War I necessity. Every available space should grow food. Every household should contribute to national survival. Soldiers returning from the trenches brought unexpected knowledge. They had seen what burial did to organic waste. They had watched plants thrive in soil enriched by decomposition. They understood intuitively that the trench method worked even if they could not explain the biochemistry. These veterans became evangelists for buried composting. Agricultural journals from the 1920s contain numerous references to trench methods. The Rodale family, who would later found the organic farming movement in America, documented trench composting as a foundational technique. Extension publications from land-grant universities included instructions for burying organic waste. The method was not fringe or alternative. It was mainstream agricultural practice. Farmers with limited access to commercial fertilizers relied on trench composting to maintain soil fertility. Rural communities without waste collection services used trenches to dispose of kitchen scraps productively. The technique solved two problems simultaneously: waste management and soil improvement. This dual function made trench composting economically powerful. A farmer who buries waste, instead of hauling it away, saves labor and disposal costs. The same farmer who grows crops in enriched soil saves fertilizer purchases. The savings compound across seasons and years. By the 1930s, trench composting was established practice across the English-speaking agricultural world. Then synthetic nitrogen arrived. The Haber-Bosch process changed everything. German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch developed a method to synthesize ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen in the early 1900s. The process required enormous energy and high pressure, but it produced unlimited quantities of nitrogen fertilizer from thin air. The technology was initially developed for explosives production during World War I. The same chemical reaction that created fertilizer also created the ammunition that killed millions. The factories that would later feed the world first supplied the weapons that devastated it. After the war, chemical companies needed new markets for their nitrogen production capacity. Explosives demand collapsed with the armistice. Factories designed for wartime production faced closure. The industry pivoted to agricultural applications with aggressive marketing and government lobbying. Synthetic nitrogen was positioned as modern, scientific, and progressive. Traditional methods were dismissed as old-fashioned, inefficient, and beneath the dignity of serious farmers. The messaging was consistent and relentless. Real farmers use chemicals. Only backward peasants rely on compost. Government agricultural policy aligned with industry interests. Research. Funding flowed to chemical approaches. Extension services promoted synthetic fertilizers. Agricultural education curricula eliminated traditional soil building techniques. Within a single generation, knowledge that had accumulated over centuries was erased from institutional memory. Trench composting was not disproven, it was simply forgotten. No study demonstrated that synthetic nitrogen outperformed buried organic matter. No research compared long-term soil health between chemical and biological approaches. The scientific method was never applied because the conclusion was predetermined by economic interests. The fertilizer industry today generates over $200 billion annually worldwide. This figure is almost incomprehensible in its scale. $200 billion flowing through corporate accounts every single year. Companies like Nutria, Yara, CF Industries, and Mosaic dominate global food production. Their products are applied to virtually every acre of commercial farmland on Earth. Their profits depend on farmers purchasing inputs every single season, year after year, generation after generation. These corporations employ lobbyists in every agricultural nation. They fund research at universities that train future farmers. They sponsor extension programs that advise current farmers. They advertise in publications that farmers read. The entire information ecosystem that shapes agricultural practice is saturated with their influence and their money. Trench composting generates zero revenue for any corporation. The materials are waste products that would otherwise require disposal. The labor is minimal, measured in minutes per trench. The results last for years without reapplication. Every gardener who adopts the method becomes a customer permanently lost to the fertilizer industry. This economic reality explains the institutional silence. No company funds research into techniques that eliminate their products. No industry association promotes methods that destroy their market. No lobbyist advocates for policies that reduce fertilizer dependence. The World War I soldiers who discovered trench composting had no shareholders to satisfy. They simply noticed what worked and shared the knowledge freely. Their mistake was assuming that effective techniques would naturally spread through agricultural systems. They did not anticipate that effectiveness threatens profits, and threatened profits trigger suppression. The implementation requires almost no skill. Dig a trench approximately 12 inches deep and 12 inches wide. Length can vary based on available space and material volume. A 3-foot trench handles kitchen scraps from an average household for approximately 1 month. Fill the trench with organic waste. Kitchen scraps work perfectly. Vegetable peelings, fruit cores, coffee grounds, eggshells, and plate scrapings can all go directly into the trench. Avoid meat and dairy if rodents are a concern, though buried material attracts far fewer pests than surface composting. Add nitrogen-rich materials for faster decomposition. Grass clippings, fresh plant trimmings, and even urine accelerate the breakdown process. The nitrogen feeds bacteria that consume carbon-rich materials. Balance is less critical than in surface composting because the enclosed environment moderates decomposition regardless of input ratios. Cover with the excavated soil and wait. 6 to 8 inches of soil coverage prevents odors, excludes pests, and retains all nutrients. The buried material decomposes over 2 to 6 months depending on climate and soil biology. Warmer conditions and active earthworm populations speed the process. Plant directly above the trench when ready. Heavy-feeding crops like tomatoes, squash, and corn perform exceptionally well over buried organic matter. Their roots penetrate into the decomposed material and access nutrients that surface. Applications could never deliver to deep root zones. Rotate trench locations each season. Dig new trenches in different areas to distribute fertility throughout the garden. Over several years, the entire growing space becomes enriched with organic matter and biological activity. Soil structure improves permanently. The trench method does not require permission from anyone. It does not require purchase from any store. It does not require expertise validated by institutions that serve industry interests rather than gardener needs. It requires only a shovel, organic waste, and willingness to try what millions of gardeners across a century have already proven works. The results speak louder than any marketing campaign. Gardeners who adopt trench composting report vegetable yields increasing 30 to 50% in the first season alone. Plants grow visibly larger. Leaves display deeper green coloration, indicating optimal nitrogen availability. Fruit production increases in both quantity and quality. Tomatoes taste better. Peppers grow larger. Squash vines extend further and produce more abundantly. Soil that previously required constant amendment becomes self-sustaining. The cycle of purchase, application, and depletion ends. Gardens transition from dependent systems requiring constant inputs to independent ecosystems generating their own fertility. Watering needs decrease dramatically as organic matter improves moisture retention. Sandy soil holds water it previously could not. Clay soil drains water it previously trapped. The improvements compound over time. Each trench adds organic matter that persists for years. Each season of buried waste increases the earthworm population. Each cycle builds on previous cycles until the garden reaches a fertility level that synthetic fertilizers cannot match regardless of application rate. Commercial farmers in water-scarce regions have rediscovered the method. Australian growers facing drought conditions report that trench-composted areas survive water restrictions that devastate chemically fertilized fields. The organic matter holds moisture that sand and clay cannot retain. The biological activity creates soil structure that resists compaction. Urban gardeners with limited space find trench composting essential. Small beds cannot accommodate traditional compost piles. Trench composting happens invisibly beneath growing plants. Kitchen waste disappears into the garden without odor, without pests, without unsightly decomposition piles. Community gardens have adopted the method for waste management. Instead of hauling organic waste to municipal facilities, gardeners bury it on site. The garden improves while reducing the community's waste stream. Municipal composting programs cost taxpayers money. Trench composting costs nothing and produces better results. The evidence accumulates despite institutional neglect. No university extension program promotes trench composting. No fertilizer company acknowledges its existence. No government agricultural policy supports its adoption. Yet the method spreads through gardening communities because it works too well to suppress entirely. The internet has accelerated this grassroots revival. YouTube videos demonstrate the technique to millions of viewers. Gardening forums share results and refinements. Social media connects practitioners across continents. The knowledge that industry tried to bury is resurfacing through channels that industry cannot control. The World War I soldiers who discovered this method are long dead. They survived artillery barrages, poison gas attacks, and conditions that would break most humans. They returned home carrying physical and psychological wounds that never fully healed. They also carried knowledge that could have transformed agriculture. Some of them shared what they learned. They taught their children and neighbors. They wrote letters to agricultural journals. They demonstrated the technique at farming gatherings. For a brief window between the wars, their knowledge entered the mainstream. Then industry buried it. Not with shovels, but with marketing budgets. Not in trenches, but in forgotten library archives. Not under soil, but under mountains of advertising promoting chemical alternatives. The soldiers could not have anticipated this outcome. They assumed useful knowledge would naturally persist. They believed that effective techniques would earn permanent places in agricultural practice. They did not understand that effectiveness threatens profits, and profits control information. 100 years later, the knowledge is resurfacing. Not through universities that ignored it. Not through extension services that forgot it. Through ordinary people sharing what works with other ordinary people who want to grow food without corporate dependence. The trench method does not require permission. It does not require purchase. It does not require expertise validated by institutions that serve industry interests. It requires only a shovel, organic waste, and willingness to try what millions of gardeners have already proven. The fertilizer industry generates $200 billion annually selling products that trench composting replaces for free. Every gardener who adopts this method withdraws from that economy. Every household that buries kitchen scraps instead of buying fertilizer bags represents revenue permanently lost. Every community that spreads this knowledge threatens an industry built on manufactured dependence. The soldiers who crawled through World War I trenches could not defeat the economic forces that suppressed their discovery, but they started something that those forces cannot stop. The trenches they dug in their gardens produced vegetables that fed their families. The knowledge they shared produced understanding that survived their deaths. The method they proved continues working exactly as it did a century ago. Soil does not care about corporate profits or shareholder expectations or quarterly earnings reports. Earthworms do not respond to marketing campaigns. Decomposition does not require shareholder approval. The biology that creates fertility operates independently of economic systems designed to capture value from natural processes. The World War I soldiers discovered something that industry could suppress but never disprove. Buried organic matter creates fertility. Fertility creates food. Food creates independence from systems that profit from dependence. The trench awaits you now. Dig it, fill it, cover it, grow from it. The soldiers showed us exactly how, over a century ago, the industry tried to make us forget. Now you know precisely what they wanted to bury permanently. If this opened something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and share spreads what they tried to suppress. See you in the next one.